Justin Trudeau has gone further than he ever has before. Yesterday, he made a public statement that could have been written by Hamas itself. Here, take a listen.
The human tragedy that is unfolding in Gaza is heart-wrenching, especially the suffering we see in and around the Al-Shifa hospital. I have been clear that the price of justice cannot be the continued suffering of all Palestinian civilians. Even wars have rules. All innocent life is equal in worth, Israeli and Palestinian. I urge the government of Israel to exercise maximum restraint. As the world is watching, on TV, on social media, we're hearing the testimonies of doctors, family members, survivors, kids who've lost their parents. The world is witnessing this, the killing of women and children, of babies. This has to stop.
You know he's serious because he's using his substitute drama teacher voice. I have been clear. As if the whole world was hanging on his every word. Hey, is the Canadian Prime Minister weighed in yet? Let's go listen to him. He used the phrase, the price of justice. A war actually is not about justice. I suppose that part of it is justice, but it's actually about making sure that Hamas cannot ever attack Israel again. It's a military objective, not a legal objective. By the way, even though Israel is about halfway through Gaza now, Hamas is still firing rockets at Israeli civilians literally every single day. They haven't stopped. That's why the war continues, to eradicate these new Nazis and stop them from shooting. Even wars have rules, I suppose. Trudeau says it. But what rule is Trudeau suggesting Israel has violated? It's not actually against the laws of war to accidentally cause collateral damage to citizens. It's regrettable, but there is no war in history that has not had civilian casualties, including in hospitals. Here's a headline from the U.S.-led war against ISIS a few years ago. Airstrikes take out ISIS or IS headquarters in Mosul Hospital. I'm sorry it happens, obviously, but that's part of the terrorist move. Have civilians as human shields. You can't stop that from happening. The terrorists know that's your law, and they'll use your law against you. It's very well known that Hamas deliberately uses hospitals as their terrorist bases. Here's the Wall Street Journal citing U.S. intelligence confirming it. But we don't need intelligence guesses anymore. Israel is now in the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza, the main hospital, and they've already found all sorts of Hamas terrorist weapons in the hospital already. That was known, by the way, before Trudeau made his speech last night. So Israel does have rules of war, and it does follow them. It goes further than most allied armies do. It provided a humanitarian corridor to let the civilians out. It dropped 1 million leaflets telling civilians to get out, and most of them did. That's not just following the rules of war. It's following those rules of war more than any other military in world history has done. I don't want to laugh right now, but this made me chuckle. Take a look.
On this day in 1944, heartless Winston Churchill refused a ceasefire and continued the genocidal attack on Nazi Germany. As we well know now, far more German civilians have died in the war, which makes them the victims and Britain the war criminal.
Say, in his little speech there, why didn't Trudeau ask Hamas to follow the rules of war, to stop using human shields, to stop shooting at Israeli civilians, to release the hostages? Not a word about their obligations. None of those things are permitted under the laws of war, or any laws, actually. That's what I mean when I say that Trudeau perfectly echoed the Hamas talking points. Imagine not having a word to say about terrorists holed up in a hospital, terrorists holding babies as hostages. Not a word about any of that, not even in his drama teacher voice. But that last part there, the world is witnessing the killing of children and babies, that Trudeau said, that's pure blood libel. That's pure medieval-style Jew hatred. I mean, why not just say Jews use blood to bake their matzah bread, or Jews poison the village well. Immediately, Hamas has used that propaganda. Trudeau said it last night. It's already in circulation, that killing of the babies line. It was a shocking attack by Trudeau, so one-sided, and it was very late at night in Israel, but no one less than the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself replied at length. Let me read to you his reply written in English and published on Twitter. Justin Trudeau, it is not Israel that is deliberately targeting civilians, but Hamas, that beheaded, burned, and massacred civilians in the worst horrors perpetrated on Jews since the Holocaust. While Israel is doing everything to keep civilians out of harm's way, Hamas is doing everything to keep them in harm's way. Israel provides civilians in Gaza humanitarian corridors and safe zones. Hamas prevents them from leaving at gunpoint. It is Hamas, not Israel, that should be held accountable for committing a double war crime, targeting civilians while hiding behind civilians. The force of civilization must back Israel in defeating Hamas barbarism. I think, if I'm not mistaken, by the way, that the only G7 leader who has not visited Israel during the war is Trudeau. It's pretty obvious why. He's pro-Hamas. But I couldn't help think of our substitute drama teacher taking a run at Netanyahu. Here's a tweet I made of the two leaders and how they spent their youth. Yeah, it's not a comparison in terms of gravitas, is it? It wasn't just Netanyahu who responded to Trudeau, by the way. Here's the Israeli leader of the opposition. So basically all of Israel thinks Trudeau's a schmuck. Yair Lapid said, Prime Minister Trudeau, Israel is defending itself in difficult conditions against a brutal terrorist organization while trying to rescue babies, children, women, and men who are being held hostage by Hamas ISIS. Responsibility for this terrible situation rests with Hamas ISIS. Then he wrote a second part. Hamas launched this war, Hamas hides in civilian buildings, and Hamas abuses Gazans as human shields. If Canada ever found itself under a sustained and brutal attack like the one we face now, you would find Israel by your side. We expect the same support. Trudeau was being one-sided against the democracy, and he was smearing that democracy, and he didn't have a word to say against Hamas itself. He's retailing propaganda against Israel like he did when he prematurely declared that Israel had attacked another hospital with a missile, remember a few weeks ago? But very soon it was found out that it was actually a Palestinian terrorist rocket that went astray that hit the hospital. Trudeau still hasn't apologized for his lie, by the way, nor has Melanie Joly, the foreign minister who did the same. There's a lot of lying going on. Look at this stunning, half-hearted apology by the BBC.
And now an apology from the BBC. BBC News, as it covered initial reports that Israeli forces has entered Gaza's main hospital. We said that medical teams and Arab speakers were being targeted. This was incorrect and misquoted a Reuters report. We should have said IDF forces included medical teams and Arabic speakers for this operation. So we apologise for this error, which fell below our usual editorial standards. The correct version of events was broadcast minutes later.
Yeah, what a lie. Here's actual images of Israel bringing in incubators and other medical supplies to that hospital. They didn't destroy the hospital. A hospital, but there sure were a lot of non-hospital people in there when the Israelis were about to arrive who were panicking. Why would a doctor at a hospital panic? Well, those weren't doctors, were they? You know, I don't quote him much these days, but David Frum had an accurate tweet about Trudeau. Here's what he said. Justin Trudeau's public reprimand of Israel tonight will have zero effect on the region. He must know that. In Canada, however, his words will be heard as permission by those harassing Jews. He should know that too. He is risking Jewish safety to cushion the drop in his polls. I think that's exactly right. I think Trudeau alienated some Muslims a few months ago by saying that any parent who is worried about transgender extremism in schools is probably a racist. Trudeau said that. I think he's trying to win those voters back and shore up his support in general, but it's never enough, is it? You can't negotiate or compromise with terrorists.